Welcome back. The last debate will be on income and wealth inequality, the solutions and the causes. From 2009 to 2012, we have seen a 95% income gains go to the top 1% of the U.S. population. Is this a problem? What are causing these issues, and how do we solve it? Our debaters will be Nike, representing y'all, and Simone, representing the opposition.
Hi, my name is Simone. I'd like to thank the Young Americans for Liberty for hosting this event for us today. So I would like to start off with just saying that the exponentially growing income inequality represents much more than just the monetary differences in pay between the rich and the poor. Otherwise, we would be implying that 99% of the American population is simply less hardworking, therefore deserve to make almost 1.5 million less than the 1%. The real inequality lies in the availability of opportunities for everyone to climb up the economic ladder. Racism, sexism, ageism, heterosexism, and residential segregation are actualized through the markets, thereby perpetuating inequality. Therefore, I argue that in order to reduce income inequality, we must focus on eradicating those forms of suppression and facilitate income growth within disenfranchised communities. This could be through education reform, re-strengthening unions and labor protection laws, and adopting more progressive tax code. And that is my opening statement. I'd like Nige to begin.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight on our first hosted debate. First, I'd like to clarify that libertarians do not advocate for abolishing income inequality or wealth inequality as a whole. On the contrary, we believe that inequality is acceptable in a free society. Why shouldn't someone, through hard work and progress past their peers? We should welcome the rewards that come from individual achievement. But I, and libertarians overall, do recognize that the gap between the rich and the poor has widened, especially within the last 5 years. From 2009 to 2012, 95% of income gains has gone to the top 1%. So yes, there is an issue. The issue that we highlight is when individuals become wealthy based on connections rather than effort and production. Government cronyism, where politicians offer corporate welfare, corporate bailouts, and tax loopholes that distort the free market competition, favors lobbyists who donate to their campaigns. The most prevalent of these examples is the 2008 financial bailouts of major U.S. banks and the U.S. auto industry. But let's look at a recent example of cronyism. The Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, was literally intended to suppress competition by eliminating insurance agencies in the individual market. The purpose, to isolate the market in favor of major insurance companies, forcing Americans to purchase insurance from these companies. The question is massive inequality inherent in a free market economy, or is it another unintended consequence of government policies? But what is a free market? A free market is minimal or total absence of government involvement in the economic affairs of individuals. That means minimal regulations, minimal taxes, minimum government spending, and no corporate welfare benefits or bailouts. See, in a free market, when you make money, you keep it. But likewise, when you lose money, you lose it. And that's a good thing. But in the system that we have now, when you make money, you're penalized for success unless you have a friend in government. In the system we have, when you lose money, your losses are subsidized through bailouts or corporate welfare. Obamacare has a provision where the government compensates an insurance company when they don't meet their profit targets. This is far from a free market. According to PolitiFact, the total amount of regulations in the Federal Register is 34,844 pages long. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Our average tax rate on high-income earners is approximately 40%, which includes federal and state taxes. According to Philip Matera, in his study called Good Jobs First, Subsidizing the Corporate 1%, he states that since 1976, 3/4 of all development subsidies went to 965 corporations, accounting for $110 billion in subsidies and public money. The Fortune 500 corporations alone accounted for 16,000 subsidy awards worth $63 billion, mostly in the form of tax breaks. The Federal Reserve increases inflation by printing $85 billion a month, giving it to a handful of banks and wishing it upon a star that they invest in the economy, but instead they invest in stocks and bonds. So where is the free market? The problem is that we don't have one. And because of progressive liberal policies, we drifted away from these principles. See, it's not that liberals are ignorant or stupid, not by any means. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. They criticize businesses for hiring individuals at minimum wage without acknowledging that only 2.4% of adults over the age of 25 earns minimum wage. They blame outsourcing the jobs while turning a blind eye to the 34,000 pages of regulatory costs. They say the healthcare system is broken while forgetting that the government has controlled 50% of healthcare over the last 50 years. Liberals advocate for rent control or subsidized housing while not tackling the Federal Reserve's attempts to inflate another housing bubble.
1 minute.
Progressives often demonize the top 1%, but don't understand that the top 1% isn't the same by year. Actually, according to the Department of Treasury's income mobility in the U.S. from 1996 to 2005, more than half of the top 1% in 1996 wasn't even in that bracket in 2005. They'll advocate for a living wage but ignore the negative consequences of higher unemployment and higher cost of living. They'll say investment in education is much needed, but forget that the government controls education and spends 7.3% of our GDP on education, higher than the average of OECD countries. We hear that we need more spending on welfare, but forget that we've had a war on poverty for 50 years and poverty is stagnant. See, liberals, communists, and progressives aren't slaves to the facts. They're slaves to a dogmatic viewpoint that government has all the answers and that the free market is to blame for these issues. A common theme that we'll see throughout this debate is the idea that a few central planners in a distant capital can plan our lives and eliminate inequality. The idea that we are all programmable beings, that with more rules on our economic affairs, they'll be able to attain milestones that involve our best interests.
Please finish your point.
Libertarians reject these ideas. Libertarians believe that we do not know what's best for society and to control economic circumstances of individuals is immoral. We believe that competition and free markets act as the best catalyst to decreasing the income gap, and it's collectivism that has caused the increase in inequality. Thank you.
Nikki, I believe that you are wrong. Maybe I'm not liberal, maybe I'm not communist, maybe I'm not socialist, but I don't believe that the government has all the answers. I do believe, though, that the people and their voices should have all the answers. What we have seen since 1980 is a deregulation in capital, basically, to put it simply. And after that, the top 1% share of that capital rose from 33% to 54%, while the bottom 90% share dropped from 36 down to 22. Some revolution, right? And that being said, with the deregulation of the markets, and yes, government has been involved in perpetuating inequalities in the economy, that the government and the markets have been working together. And we need the people's voices to be heard more than corporate contributions to elections and etc.
Again, I believe that the best way to reduce the income gap between rich and poor is through the free market. She talked about education, Well, the fact is that the government controls education and does a bad job at doing it. Poor people, low-income people, are forced to go to government public schools. But these public schools are horrible. She talks about the people's voice matter. But here's the thing, when you centralize government control, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It only matters what the central planners think. If you really want people's voices to matter, then you should want a free market, because through the market, you vote with your dollar. If you do not like something, if you do not like Walmart, then don't shop at Walmart. But don't stop the next man from shopping there and having a cheaper cost of living. She talks about deregulation. And this the case can be made that we have been lackadaisical on the financial markets. But here's the fact. From 1980 to 2009, we have added 21 new regulations on the financial market, while we only repealed 3 regulations on the financial market. Now, we could talk about the qualitative effects of these regulations, but when you look at the quantity, we have added more regulations that we have subtracted. She talks about the top 1%, but one of the things that most liberals and people on the left don't understand is that the top 1% isn't the same year by year. Actually, I quoted one statistic on income mobility, but here's another one. Top 400 income earners tax returns reported by the U.S. Department of Treasury in spring 2003 reported that from 1992 to 2000, out of the top 400 income earners, fewer than 13% were in the same category more than 2 years. In 1996, 4/5 of millionaires did not inherit the wealth. More than half of the top 1% in 1996 wasn't even in the bracket in 2005. The thing is, we have to understand is that you start off small and you move up the income ladder. But when you have excessive regulation, excessive government involvement in people's economic affairs, you're going to limit the ability of people to have income mobility. A great example of how income mobility works is based on a University of Michigan study that's shown from 1975 to 1991. 95% of the bottom 20% of income earners rose out of the bottom 20%, and 29% of the bottom 20% rose to the top quintile of income distribution. People do not stay in their categories for more than a couple of years, and statistics and data have proved it. Thank you.
I actually read that study too, or one at least similar to it. Yes, one in the study that I read by Washington Cornell University actually is different but had similar effects. 1 in every 9 Americans works their way up to the wealthiest 1% for at least 1 year in their lives. But who is that 1 out of 9 persons? They also determined in the study that access to top-level income was significantly influenced by historical patterns of race and class inequality. Therefore, I argue that this is why we need government to step in these situations and address those inequalities. If markets were free, I was going to save this for my closing statement. I know that markets aren't racist and sexist and what have you, but people who operate within them are. And if we don't have anybody in any government, which is supposed to speak for the people, not corporations, protecting certain rights of those who are being disenfranchised, then we are going to see a perpetuation of inequalities. And to speak about education, we do have to rethink the public education funding programs that we have in place now. In 2010 to 2011, the richest 10% of school districts spent 2 times as much as the poorest 10% per pupil. We definitely need to redistribute those education funds so that more people in lower income communities are able to make it to college and progress beyond that. There's no denying that education puts you in a better place to get a higher paying job in the future.
1 minute.
To add to that, I'm taking more of income inequality is definitely an issue, but we have societal inequality is, I think, more pressing and is playing into the income factor. At age 22, 89% of white high school dropouts have jobs, while on the other hand, only 40% of black college graduates did. Now that's a shocking statistic. Let me repeat that for you. 40% of black college graduates had jobs, while 89% of white high school dropouts did.
Again, she speaks about 1 in 9 person status in the top quintile of income distribution within their lifetimes. But the fact is that when you start off at a low-paying job, you do not stay there for 30, 40, 50 years. You move up the income ladder. She talks about race, but let's really look at race. Prior to the 1930s, the black community had cities and towns that were totally black owned. We had black banks, black lawyers, black hospitals. It was called Black Wall Street. But guess what happened? When FDR came into office, the regulatory state came into play. Minimum wage laws were actually lobbied to suppress black employment, and so was labor unions. So it's weird to me that she would even say that we should advocate for more union membership when the whole purpose of unions were to suppress black employment because blacks were taking their jobs. Actually, in 1898, there was 4 private schools in Washington, D.C. One of them was black. For 5 years straight, that school performed better than 2 of the other 3 white private schools. And for years, in the 1940s, 1950s, 1930s, they were one of the top schools. Miriam Wright, who is the first black woman to pass the Mississippi bar, she stated that we, as black people, had a better education system during segregation than we do right now. I wonder why. Maybe because it was in the private sector, not in the government sector. One of the things it talks about is how black college students graduate and only 40% of them have jobs compared to 89% of whites who graduate out of high school.
1 minute.
So, African American blacks who attain a college degree usually attain college degrees within majors that don't often pay that much. And in a lot of cases, they might not even be in demand in the market. Whereas whites who might go to a better education, a better high school, yes, you're right, they do. But shouldn't we offer choice to low-income parents to send their children to schools that they probably couldn't afford otherwise? That should be an option, but the government limits that option. Thank you.
I think we've argued about this before, Nika, actually. But when you have to make your decisions based on the marketplace, on what major you're going to choose, and what career path you'd like to take, what dreams you'd like to make real, you shouldn't be thinking about whether you're going to be able to feed your kids when you go home, or are you going to be able to, meet up with your friends later and have a drink, or maybe you can't go visit your family and far away, whatever it is. You shouldn't have to make your decisions based on the markets. So that being said, I don't believe that it is fair for, if we had a free market, that people would have to make their decisions based on said marketplace. We wouldn't be able to have anybody going and taking majors like African American studies because they wouldn't have good paying jobs. We'd be funneling our attention into capital gains. and that would be restricting our nation culturally and our freedom on a grander scale.
She criticizes the decisions being made in the market, but what the market is the government not controlling people's lives. So when she says that we shouldn't make decisions based on the market, she's saying that we should make the decisions by asking government for handouts and favors. I do not believe in that. I believe in independence. One of the things that we haven't talked about is that the cost of living has increased, and that is an issue, but what is causing the cost of living to increase? There's no criticism from the progressives, collectivists, or the left in general of the Federal Reserve's policy to devalue the currency and cause its prices across the board to increase. When they advocate for minimum wage laws, they don't understand that you're going to have an increase in prices or you're going to have an increase in unemployment. It's just a fact. One of the things that we should focus on, rather than trying to redistribute income, is that we should focus on lowering the cost of living through deflation, through getting rid of these regulations, through lowering taxes, and through allowing the market to dictate prices. Because the market aims at equilibrium, and the market always aims at a lower cost. Even Marx talked about this. He said as technology progresses, capitalists has every incentive to lower the cost because of competition. But what the government does is suppress competition. And competition is our golden goose. So to solve the issues that we have right now, we need more competition. We need less regulations. To convey the message of regulations even further, just think about it. Who has a better ability to comply with 1,000 pages of regulations that you have to hire lawyers to decipher? A rich man or a poor man? Of course the rich man has more leverage. So when you increase regulations on the market, you're suppressing the ability of low-income earners to uplift themselves out that situation. Now, I've quoted some stats on income mobility, and I'm not saying that this is a free market. I'm not saying that's a perfect market. It could be better, but it's not as bad as what she make it seem to be. You might hear 1% owns 40% of the wealth, but who is that 1%? What is that measurement by? And let's just think about this. If you made $100 million 1 year, and you lost $50 million 1 year, guess what? You're considered to be under the poverty line because your income declined. Are they really under the poverty line if they have $50 million left? See, we have to think about how we look at these measurements.
1 million.
It's not just a book that you look at the cover and you know what's inside of it. You have to read the book. You have to understand the statistics. And this is the message that I send to the audience and anyone who's looking. There is consequences to any action that you do in the market. When you raise taxes, you get less revenue. When you increase minimum wage, higher unemployment, less hiring. There is no constant in the market, and that's one thing we have to understand. Thank you.
We'll now have the closing arguments from both parties.
So yesterday, I learned of something called the social reproduction theory. Sociologist Christopher Doob developed the theory of social reproduction, or the way that inequality is perpetuated generationally through society and institutional racism. When we have a free market and we have a group of people who starts off with maybe $20,000 a year in income, and that's all they have. Nothing to invest, nothing to save. What happens the following year? The same thing. And the year after that, the same thing. When you have somebody who is at the top of the market and they are making $2 million, they have plenty to save and plenty to invest in. And yes, maybe they would be creating jobs, but Marx also said that with the creation of technology, we have seen less jobs are being created because you can replace workers with machines. And also, what incentives does a capitalist have for paying a livable wage in a free marketplace? Marx talks a lot about sustenance and the sustenance of living, and that's what a capitalist in a free marketplace would pay their workers. They would pay them enough so that they could come back to work the next day. And
1 minute.
that doesn't allot very much freedom to move up on the economic ladder. Thank you.
So we've touched on various topics in this debate, and both sides make good points. We've seen two differences on the causes and solutions to income inequality. On one side, there's the view that more government needs to take an extended role in the equal distribution of wealth and income. On the other side, the side that I take, which is the view that government is the problem and we need less, not more intrusion. I have shown that economic mobility is a fact. I have shown that the arbitrary categorization of people into groups cannot offer solutions to inequality. We need choice in our school system. The more, the better. The free market offers the best opportunity for individuals to uplift themselves out of their impoverished positions. But we cannot harness the ability of the free market as long as we accept centralized control of our economy. As long as the government has control, that source of power will always face the threat of corruption. Government regulations benefit corporate interests, not the interests of the people. The power to tax is the power to destroy. And we've seen the consequences through lack of jobs and opportunity. How can we ever hope to achieve our goals when the lowest income of people are forced to attend government schools that have a poor track record of success? Why does our government regulate the economy to the extent that the dreams of those who reside in the lowest of incomes are diminishing in the light of compliance costs? Is it really beneficial to have a monetary policy that increases the cost of living while favoring major banks and corporations? And what about welfare and the incentives embedded in the programs that keep families in perpetual poverty?
1 minute.
How many times must the government fail in its goals before we realize the best chance for our prosperity is to take control of our own lives? Will we agree? Maybe, maybe not. But that's the purpose of this debate. A clear choice between the ideals of liberty or the ideals of restraint. Should we restrain the ability of individuals to prosper in the name of a collective good? Or are we so pessimistic of freedom that we're willing to allow our lives to be controlled by the government? And understand that in order for the government to control the economy, they must control people. To control people means that the idea of a sovereign individual will fade away, to be replaced by the tyranny of the majority. Think about the issues we face today, and think long and hard. If you're willing to sacrifice your gifts and talents to be reduced to a number in the math equation, go ahead. Are we all the same? If so, what assembly line do we come from? For I was under the assumption that we are unique and could never be equated to autonomous drones. And if we are drones, what about the sacrifices of those in the past? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live under slavery under the pharaohs? Should Christ have refused to cross? Should the patriots on Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard around the world? The martyrs of history were not fools, and the ultimate goal throughout human history has always been to attain self-determination, to end the tyranny of the few. Let's not abandon our country's principles, and let's send the message that our freedom will not and cannot be purchased by safety and security of the state. Thank you.
At this point, we'd like to open up the questions to the audience.
I want both parties to respond to, let's call it minimum wage, standard of living, subsidized government education in Hong Kong for the last 3 decades. Speak on that from your various positions.
I'm not informed on that.
Well, I'm not sure about Hong Kong, but when you're talking about living wage, like I made the point before, we should focus on a lower cost of living. There's several ways we can do this. First off, we have to end our monetary policy that increases inflation. Stop trying to inflate another housing bubble. Reduce the regulatory cost on businesses, because really businesses only pass it down in prices. Another thing that we could do is allow for deflation. Allow for prices to go down. Since 2008, the #1 enemy of the U.S. economy, according to our government, has been deflation. So they've been literally trying to keep prices going higher and higher and higher because the market wants the prices to go down. What I'm asking is allow the market to do what it does, lower the cost of living.
A number of ideas, libertarians in general have a number of ideas about how we could eliminate or greatly reduce income inequality and wealth inequality. And I was just wondering which of these you might potentially favor. We might be able to find some common ground here. Would you favor, for example, eliminating all sales taxes on poor people? Would you favor eliminating business license requirements for poor people trying to start up small businesses? Would you favor getting rid of regulations that prohibit people from using their own vehicle as a taxi to make money or renting out rooms in their homes to make money?
Are you asking if I'm in favor of any of
Yeah,
those?
would you support any of those ideas which would all help the poor relative to the wealthy become more prosperous in society, and they would do so in a free market way without more government control over people's lives?
I suppose I would.
Right on.
Well,
Although that being said, I mean, I don't know.
well, let me just say something about that. I do, and here's the thing: it takes more hours inside a classroom to become a hairstylist than it does to become a lawyer. Now, I asked my opponent, does this affect poor people or rich people? Of course, it's going to affect poor people more. In order to go to beauty school, you have to attend like over 4,000 hours in class, and the cost could range from $10,000 to $20,000. Now, what if I wanted to open up a braiding shop? What if I didn't even want to deal with chemicals? But I still have to attend or acquire this license. So these occupational licensing legislations does affect minority communities in a negative way.
Absolutely, I agree with that. However, if you were going to take that stance and deregulate in all of those ways, and you also deregulated, I mean, if you were to do that, it would have to be equalized throughout the entire nation, and you're going to also make those deregulations for wealthy people. And you have somebody who's wealthy and decides they want to go to beauty school, and they have all that time to put in, and you have, you know, a single mom who, you know, is taking care of 3 kids and right now is working a minimum wage job. She doesn't have that time and that money to go and get that license. You deregulate both of those and you make it so that the rich person can still get their license and that poor person would also maybe be able to get their license now, but then when they go out to open up that business, where will they be? We're going to have one person who can open a luxury salon, and then another person who can open a salon in their, maybe down the street and work on their neighbor's hair. You know, like we need to mobilize those communities so that they can move beyond where they are now through education, maybe through loans, subsidies, whatever it is.
Just 10 seconds to respond to that quickly. I think that current laws are unequal in many respects. For example, the progressive income tax, taxes higher incomes at a higher rate. I think that we could start with the poor, and if we agreed on that much, get rid of these laws and taxes and regulations for poor people, and then, after that's done, then if libertarians and fiscal conservatives want to go on and eliminate them for the rich as well, then we can have that debate when we get to that. But if we can start on eliminating those things for the poor, I think maybe we have some common ground there. Thanks.
Well, I would like to say that overall, when you lower taxes, you get more revenue. And I'm not advocating for more government spending, but it's just the way it is. And it's a win-win scenario. The government gets more money, and people keep their money, and they're able to spend it in other ways. A prime example, when we lowered the capital gains tax from 28% to 20% in 1997. We had a $152 billion revenue increase ahead of the projections that was based by the Congressional Budget Office. So yes, we should lower taxes overall for everybody. It shouldn't matter because the damage that's happening to the economy has to do with government spending and government control. So I want to limit government, get the government out of the way.
Say something about the specifics of, say, the voucher programs in the schools, about the unions eliminating single-handedly the jobs that you would like to bring back from overseas. And by that, I mean, it seems like the teachers' union are the ones who are preventing good education, the good education that you and I believe in, from taking place. The voucher system would equalize the playing field, in my opinion. What about yours?
You're speaking of higher education or also doing a voucher system with all education levels? Just to focus on higher education for the moment, or unions generally. I have friends who are members of unions, and they pay a couple $100 out of every paycheck to be a member of said union, while people who are at the top of the union make all the decisions, and they have very little say in what goes on. It's another form of power structure. If unions were strengthened and power within the unions was more equalized, then it maybe would not be the case. We had more members in I forget what the name of it is, the union on campus that's housed in HSS. If there were more teachers as members there, then we would have more people who actually care about the education system and providing a quality education rather than making a profit off of the education system. The decisions that would be made, would be more in our favor.
FDR, President Roosevelt, was against public sector unions because he felt that there was a conflict of interest. Essentially, public sector unions in general are aimed at increasing protections for their employees, and is really to suppress the ability of the employer to quote-unquote exploit the employee. But we have to ask ourselves, when it comes to the public sector, who is the employer? It's a taxpayer. So when you have a union who is protecting employees and adding more and more protections, you're going against the taxpayer, and the taxpayer is not trying to exploit nobody. All we want is a service to be done. We want a quality education. We want a police force that is not abusive. We want federal agencies that are held accountable. But public sector unions suppress this ability. A prime example, a couple years ago, there was a teacher who had molested a young woman in Southern California. It took him 5 years to fire him, and he received pay. In Michigan, a male teacher had raped a little boy, and still the unions were advocating for him to still receive pay. They were advocating for more job protection, and they paid his lawyer fees, even though I'm not sure if he was prosecuted or not, or if he was convicted. But it's the whole idea of accountability. We cannot hold public service accountable when you have a large union presence. And let me just make this one point about unions. The top 19 of political donors are unions. And the top 2 are the teachers' unions and the police unions. And we wonder why we have increase in police brutality, and we wonder why our education system is so broken.
Do both of you agree that corporations' goal is to create customers and accumulate huge profits?
Final question.
I'll start off with that. Yes, you know, the thing is we should not demonize a profit, because first off, the only way that you're able to make a profit is if you provide a quality service at a low cost. Unless you have government benefits that suppresses competition, isolates the market for a small select group of corporations, then that's a problem. If, you know, she talked about we need to redistribute some of the wealth, and I made the case that the market has a way of redistributing wealth, and it's called recessions. And what a recession is, it only happens when a bubble is created, usually by printing money, and by the Federal Reserve printing money, offering at low interest rates, and they give it to these select banks, and these banks invested in parts of the economy that is unsustainable. So then it grows, this bubble grows, and then it pops. But all that phony and artificial wealth needs to be taken away, and that's what the market attempts to do. Actually, during the 1990 and 2001 recessions, the richest 5% of Americans, measured by net worth, experienced the largest decline in their wealth. Also, during the past 3 recessions, the top 1% of income earners felt the highest income shocks out of all groups. In the 2007 to 2009 recession, the incomes of people making $1 million or more fell 50%, while those making $50,000 or less fell by only 2%. See, all that artificial wealth that was created through the bubble phase, which is caused by government, is taken away through recession. So we should welcome recessions if we want real redistribution of wealth.
Ask you questions.
All right. Last 3 questions.
Fine.
All right, so simple question here. How would you guys apply your ideology or how your take on how things should run? And how would you apply that to fixing our currently broken CSU system? So how would you say that the free market is going to fix the CSU system? And how would you say,
Government intervention.
something like that, I don't know.
Well, if you're talking about fixing the CSU system in respect to prices, there's a lot of ways we can do that. I mean, just think about it. You're required to take 60 units of GE requirements that has nothing to do with your major. I think that a better focus will be, yes, focus on math, focus on English skills, but let's focus on your major. Rather than waiting 60 units before you even go into political science or into biology or chemistry, let's do it at 10 units. That's one way. Another way, which is advocated from our treasurer, Mr. Crilly, is that if you should pay for what you use. There's a lot of people on this campus who do not go to the gym, yet their tuition, the gym is included in their tuition. So well, we could lower costs by, first off, just simply making, or not making, but allowing students to have a choice on where their tuition funds go and let them keep more of their money. The other way to do it is allow prices to dictate student loans.
What do you mean by that? Prices?
Interest is the price of money, but the government keeps interest rates on tuition, student loans, artificially low. And we do need these interest rates to be higher for different majors so that the allocation of resources could be a lot more efficient.
I would like to answer your question. San Francisco State University recently has invested several $1,000s in revamping our sports program and the beautification of the campus. And why is that? My guess is to draw more students that will pay thousands upon thousands of dollars for tuition, to make money off of that, and then do it again to draw more and more students to make money off of it, make the campus more beautiful, expand, not pay teachers anymore, not lower tuition rates, not provide more classes, just to make a profit so that they can continue to expand. That's the market for you.
Go ahead, next question.
This question is primarily directed at Nike. you mentioned that a lot of regulations kind of exclude people from the market, but what about those regulations that help actually include more people into the marketplace or help increase their chances of social mobility? For example, with like Obamacare, now definitely I will agree it has a lot of flaws, but one of the stated goals and purposes of it that I happen to agree with is their idea to help people who couldn't receive medical coverage before because of pre-existing medical conditions, that now it's supposed to stop the companies, the health insurers, from discriminating against them and not offering, or charging higher rates because they may have, for example, they may have cancer before.
What I would say is that I take the Hayekian approach that if we are going to regulate the market, we need to have regulations that increase competition and not aim for particular outcomes. Because when you have regulations that aim for a particular outcome, you choose winners and losers, and you don't ever want that in a free market because it distorts the market. But as far as the healthcare situation, we have to understand that insurance is to transfer risk. You could buy catastrophic insurance for about $30 a month, and that will cover real catastrophic injuries. But what our insurance agencies or companies are doing, they're covering everything from the sniffles to a bump on your butt to a missing toe or a split finger. I mean, it's ridiculous. We're covering everything under the sun, and that's not what insurance is made for. Imagine we had insurance on food. People would just buy a bunch of food and have refrigerated stock, but then we have a food shortage. So we have to watch out how we go about the regulatory system, and we have to be smart about it. I'm not saying that we should repeal 100% of regulations, but maybe 97% would be a good number.
Do they offer a course here on insider trading?
Kind of, sort of.
Would free access to birth control be one of those, like bumps on your butt?
Yes.
Type of coverage?
Well, because what I was getting at is, for example, what about there are situations where the marketplace, because of the increased costs, will not want to pick up these people and will not allow for them to be insured. So, for example, if I have cancer and the insurance company knows it, what's going to make any insurance company allow me, coverage if they know that I'm associated with higher costs for them?
Well, what I would say is, when we talk about health insurance, we have to talk within the context of the government controlling 50% of our healthcare market over the last 60 years. So within that context, I want to get government out. Everything that the government touches becomes more expensive and the quality declines. So if we had a free market healthcare system, with the, like Cato Institute did a study, that we have over $300 billion of regulatory costs in the healthcare market. Only about $150 billion of them costs actually improves care. A lot of it is just processing charges. And this is a debate that I had with the College Democrats last year where I annihilated them on it. Because they don't even know what they're talking about. People do not look at the government when they look at issues in society. And that's the issue that I have. The first place that we should look at is government when we look at our issues. And then let's look at individuals.
Is that all the questions? Or?
Hearing your position, both yours, I want in like 3 sentences or less, what's the first step to move towards your vision?
Oh.
Well, first step is...
Hey, ladies first.
3 steps?
No, 3 sentences or less, what's the first step?
3 sentences or less, what's the first step?
Okay.
I think I stated it earlier in the beginning. I think Nike was just talking about we need to look at government before we look at individuals, but who makes up the government? That is individual. I think I'm going over 3 sentences already. It's individuals that make up the government. Right now we're looking at a time where like voter turnout is at like 40-something%. We need to educate the people on the real issues that are happening right now. Maybe if they knew about all of these regulations that are suppressing them, they would go out and they would vote against them. So yeah, education is my big thing, because if more people understood the issues and could become involved in a democratic way, which is the way the government should work, rather than corporations making the decisions for us, we would be moving towards more equal.
We should not expect for every single person in our country to know everything about economics, to know everything about monetary policy, to know everything about every political philosopher. If you are inclined to do an art, then you should focus on art. So the issue isn't that people are knowledgeable, it's just that politicians lie. A good Thomas Sowell says that good economics is bad politics, and bad politics is good economics. The way I would start is just to end the Federal Reserve. That's the first step, because the Federal Reserve creates these bubbles, creates these cycles. It gives money to a select few banks. It allows for asset prices to stay artificially high, and this includes housing, this includes food, this includes gold, metals, and the progressive lion Elizabeth Warren doesn't even want to audit the Fed. So in the Fed, that's the first step.
Second one,
Round of applause for these two. Thank you for coming out.